Hello, my name is Jared. Welcome to my channel, Keen Reads. Welcome back if you've been here before. If not, thanks for joining us today. Filming this video a little bit later than usual, so the lighting's a little bit different. Hopefully it's not too bad. But felt like just having my lamp on rather than having the overhead lights on and making it really, really bright in here, because it is a little bit later than usual. Have a little bit of a different setup on my table today. So usually I'll have a stack of books here because I'm showing you my books. But today we're going to be going through a long list of books. So I went and combed over my shelves and we'll get into it. So I just have a notebook. It's actually my wife's notebook. And then my water bottle and my chapstick, which I have with me at all times. So today we're going to do a different video. One that I've kind of teased for a while, but I'm finally getting around to doing it, and that is looking at books in translation, and specifically looking at 5 major literary traditions, or I guess we'll call them just languages or language groups, and going over what I've read in those languages, how I would rank them compared to other languages, things like that. Again, I'm not trying to make any definitive statements here. I'm not trying for this to be controversial. This is just a fun little video that I'm making, and if you don't agree with me, that's awesome. Hopefully this can make some lively discussion in the comments. But yeah, these are just my opinions. They're also opinions I threw together over 30 minutes, so I haven't put a lot of thought into this, just kind of winging it. So who knows, maybe things will change as I'm kind of looking through it in more depth as we're going through this. But some caveats first. So I did not include anything in English. Obviously, this is fiction or literature in translation. So removed the English tradition. So America, England, British Isles. So all of that is out. I didn't include any languages that I don't have a significant number of books in. I think everything here I've read at least 5 or 6 authors in that language. So just off the top of my head, Knut Hamsun, I didn't include him because I think he's not Swiss. He's not German. He's something around there. I don't think he's German, at least, because I didn't include him in German. But he was an author in translation that I saw that I did not include. I did not include Knausgaard, Karl Ove. However you say his last name. I believe he's Scandinavian of some sort, but he's the only Scandinavian. Actually, Knut Hamsun might be Scandinavian now that I think of Finland or something, or Norway. I don't know. Anyways, I didn't include them. I think they're the only authors from other outside traditions that I did not include in here. I did not include any criticism or fiction or theory or anything like that. Although most of what I've read in that genre or area is English. I've read some Michael Foucault. I don't know if that's how you say it. Who sounds French. I don't know if he actually wrote in French or English. Same thing with Roland Barthes. I don't know if he wrote in another language or if he wrote in English or not, but regardless, I didn't include them. And I didn't include ancient languages, so I didn't include ancient Greek or Latin either. So the 5 that we're going to be looking at is French, Italian, Russian, German, and then I have a kind of a big category that I'm calling Spanish or Latino. Not Latino, that's not the correct word. Latin America, South America, kind of Spain, and then Central and South America. I'm all including in one. If that's culturally insensitive of me, I apologize in advance, but I figured I could just... It's easier to group them this way and have 5 major things that I'm comparing. So I started sitting down and trying to think about how I wanted to rank them. And I realized that I'm kind of trying to rank them in 2 different ways because there are certain things that I really, really like about some traditions that I'm just not a fan of, but I'm not a fan of the rest of the books in that tradition. So I ended up breaking up my ratings into overall, so 1 through 5. We'll start with 5. For overall, just prose, poetry, nonfiction together. And then I did write a 1 through 3 of my favorite poetry in translation. 2 of the languages I did not read any poetry in. So I did not include them in the poetry. So we'll start with the poetry. So number 3 for me for poetry was that kind of Spanish, Central and South American, because the only author that I have read any poetry of is actually Pablo Neruda, who's, I believe, Chilean. I have his complete works. You've probably seen it at Barnes and Noble or Books a Million. It's kind of a black and white with like a yellow tintish book. I see it every time I go in, which is why I'm mentioning it. And I've read about half of it. I read about half of it a couple years ago. It's been a while. But in prep for this video, I did reread some of the poems that I had marked when I read it a couple years ago. And they stood out to me. They were good. But again, since I first read it all of those years ago, again, I only read half of it too. Probably not once have I come back and really thought about any of his poems again. So 3 for me for poetry is going to be Spanish. Or Central or South American. I've never read any Italian poetry, and I've never read any Russian poetry either, so those are not included. So this is just Spanish, French, or German. Number 2 for me is German, and that's just due to Rilke. I would say he's probably my favorite poet, maybe. So I'm surprised that he came up as 2. I've read 4 of his collections. So I've read Letters to a Young Poet, which I'm not including because that's letters. I've read Sonnets to Orpheus, the Book of Oracles, or the Book of Hours. The Book of Hours, Sonnets to Orpheus, and the Duono Elegies. So those are the 3 poetry collections that I've read by him. I think I've reread them all twice at least. Just love his poetry. I feel like the images that he creates are very vivid. And I also like how he mixes in kind of like a spiritual mysticism into it, almost like Yeats does, W.B. Yeats. I kind of see them in common a little bit. But because he's the only German poet I have read, that puts him at number 2. Obviously, you'll see I haven't read a lot of poetry in translation. I haven't read a lot of poetry in general, or a lot of in translation in general. I don't know. I feel like I haven't read a lot. I know that compared to most people, I've read a ton, but it's just crazy how much there still is to read out there. But as you could probably deduce, my number 1 poetry in translation is going to be French. And that's just because there's 2 authors that I really love that are in French, and that is Charles Baudelaire and Arthur Rimbaud. So I've read Flowers of Evil by Baudelaire, and I read one of the versions that has like, it's almost his collected poems, so it includes like later publications included in it. It's very a gothic collection, very dark. Talks about this, one of the sections is called like the spleen or something like that. Very kind of Anatomy of Melancholy-ish. It kind of reminds me of that kind of vibe. And then Rimbaud, he'll always have a special place for me. I remember I read him on a very impactful trip that I took back when I was an undergrad. Actually, it might have been in pharmacy school. But I remember reading his collected works on this trip and just being completely blown away by it. So as far as my poetry ratings go, it goes Spanish in 3rd, German in 2nd, and then French in 1st. Another poet that I would love to read is, actually, I've never read any Bolaños poetry, which I believe he was a poet. You would think he was a poet from his prose, at least. So I hope there's poetry out there that I can read one day. It's also raining outside, so I hope that's not too loud. But now we're going to get into the rankings of the languages themselves. So 1 through 5, we're going to start with 5. And 5 is going to be Italian for me. This is also including like Florentine. So we're going back to like Dante. But I'll just read you the list of authors that I've read and what I kind of thought of them. So I've read of Dante, I've only read Inferno and about half of Purgatorio. And then I kind of got distracted by other things and went away. So I've only read that. I read the entire Decameron earlier this year. I've read The Prince by Machiavelli. I have read 2 books by Italo Calvino. So I've read If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler, and Invisible Cities, and then I've read the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante. And when I think about the Italian language that I've read, I think the things that stick out to me is that there's no real prose artist that I've read that really sticks out to me with his prose, I guess. Whereas when I look at the other languages, I see that there are each one, there's some type of prose artist that I just love the way that they write. And I don't think there is such a case for me that I've read in Italian. To be fair, though, this is the least of the languages that I am talking about today. This is the one that I've read the least of, so Italian. I'd say my favorite books that I've read in Italian are probably going to be the Neapolitan novels by Ferrante. I just love the atmosphere that they create and the way that she can dive into the characters. I liked If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler better than Invisible Cities. And then nothing really stood out to me, honestly, about the Decameron. I just thought it was some good tales. And I really loved the Inferno, but I think I need to really, before I dive into Purgatorio and Paradiso, I need to sit back down and reread Inferno and go over them all again, I think. So number 5 is Italian, probably more in 5th simply because of my lack of knowledge of Italian literature. Number 4, which I was kind of surprised about, was French. I've read a decent bit of French, and I like a lot of what I've read in French. It's kind of, if I were to rank these, it would be 1 through 4 would be very close, and then 5 would kind of be a distant 5th. So unfortunately for Italian, I'm sorry if I have any Italian viewers. But please, if you have any recommendations, please drop them in the comments for me so that I can expand my knowledge. But when we're looking at French, so we first of all have the 2 poets we've already talked about, who is Charles Baudelaire and then Arthur Rimbaud. Going chronologically, so the first French novel, or the first French work I've read chronologically, not in my chronology, but the first written, is a Song of Roland, which was okay. I mean, it is what it is when you're reading these old epic poets or epic works. It was much more repetitive than some of the other works I've read from other traditions. I've read The Misanthrope by Moliere. I gave it 5 stars, actually, when I read it. I don't really remember much from it, but I just remember the feeling that it gave me. And I remember finishing it and being like, wow. That and The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde are 2 of, like, perfect plays that I have read. And now, of course, I'm going through Shakespeare. But those are kind of 2 of my most important plays to me. Jules Verne was very instrumental in me when I was getting into literature. So I read 4 of his books: Journey to the Center of the Earth, The Time Machine, Around the World in 80 Days, and then The Mysterious Island, which is a sequel to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So I guess I've read 5 of his books. But again, nothing really stuck with me with Jules Verne. Now we're getting into like the heavy hitters, and this would be Proust, Germinal by Emile Zola, and then Madame Bovary by Flaubert. So when I'm really thinking about like these great prose authors, when I think of the French, I think of like Flaubert and Proust. I've only read about half of In Search of Lost Time or Remembrance of Things Past, but just from what I've read has blown me away. I'm eagerly looking forward to the day that I will finish it. It's kind of funny how things work out. I say that I'm eager to finish it one day and that I can't wait. But really, there's nothing stopping me from doing it right now. But that's another point. Like, I could just, after I'm done here, pick it up and read it. It's sitting right over on my shelf. But it's funny how we talk about things like that. Madame Bovary, obviously, Flaubert was such a stickler over his prose, and every single word. He had a word for it, or a phrase for it that I can't remember, but every word in the right place. And then I've only read one work by Emile Zola, which was Germinal, but it really struck with me. It really, it kind of hit pretty hard. for being a French novel from the end of the 20th or the end of the 19th century about something that I could not relate to at all, which was coal mining towns. But it felt very real to me. So coming in at 4, oh, and then I've also read Albert Camus. I've read probably like 4 or 5 of his works. Again, he's just an author that I read and I enjoy, but I don't find myself wanting to reread his works that often. So now we get into the top 3 of 5. And again, things got really close at this point, even with 4, because I really wanted French to be higher because of Proust. But 3, we have German. Here we have the Rilke, Kafka are doing the heavy lifting here. And I know this is probably unfair, but I am letting Goethe also do some heavy lifting, even though I've only read one of his works, which was Faust Part 1. So I've actually read everything Kafka's written. Well, that's not true. I've read all of his fiction, and I've read his diaries. I haven't read like his aphorisms or his letters. But Kafka's one of my favorite authors. I haven't really talked about him much on this channel. But Kafka and then Faust Part 1 is just phenomenal by Goethe. And I think I'm letting him do some extra lifting here because I'm really excited to read more Goethe eventually. Faust Part 2, The Sorrows of Young Werther. And I just hear he was a great critic. So excited to, even though I'm not including criticism, I think I'm cheating here already by being influenced by things that I haven't read. Other authors I have read in German include Thomas Mann. So I've read The Magic Mountain, which didn't live up to the hype for me. I enjoyed it, but I think I had very high expectations because a lot of people I really respect have talked it up, and I don't think it lived up to those expectations. Death in Venice by Thomas Mann did. I loved Death in Venice and the collected stories in there. And then the other German author that I have read is Hermann Hesse. So I've read Steppenwolf and Siddhartha, both of which, again, I enjoyed. Kind of philosophical novels. We're in the top 2. And number 2 is going to be the language that I have read the most of. And that is going to be Russian. So, Russian I really wanted to put first because I've read the most of it. I find myself wanting to read the most Russian books in that if I were to look at my like TBR and things like that, or even books on my shelves that I haven't read. I have Maxim Gorky I've never read. I've never read Dead Souls by Gogol. I would love to read some of Pushkin's poetry other than Eugene Onegin. So I guess I have read some poetry in Russian, if you want to include Eugene Onegin, which is a novel in verse. I'm not going to include it. But I think just the depths of humanity that Russian novels reach and Russian works reach are what makes them so great. I feel like every time I'm opening up a book by a Russian author, I'm not including Nabokov in this either. I consider him American. But every time I open a work by a Russian author, I'm ready to delve into the depths of the soul and find what's there, good or bad. Just kind of going through the list of what I've read in Russian so you can see what I'm kind of basing this on. So Eugene Onegin, Fathers and Sons by Turgenev. For Dostoevsky, I've read Notes from Underground, The Brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment. Tolstoy, we have Haji Marat, Anna Karenina, War and Peace. I have read the short stories of Chekhov. I haven't read his short novels or his plays. Master and Margarita. And then the collected short stories of Isaac Babel. I believe he's Russian. Don't quote me on that. If he's not, I apologize. So that's Russian. And now, number 1, we have a surprise winner. I was expecting it to be either German or Russian, actually. I was surprised when I was sitting down and I was like, I think it's got to be Spanish or Central and South American. And it's really on the way of 3 people for the most part, with some strong runner-ups. There's really no one in this category that really let me down. Like when I look at Italian, The Prince by Machiavelli and the Decameron don't really do much for me. In German, Siddhartha doesn't do much for me. Steppenwolf, again, I had really high hopes for Steppenwolf, but it just didn't tickle my fancy. French, Song of Roland, and then and Camus are just kind of there for me. Russian is pretty good throughout. I would say The Massacre and the Margarita and then Isaac Babel, if he is Russian, are the ones that kind of fall flat for me. But really in Spanish, again, I've only read 6 authors in the Spanish or the Latin American languages. But each one just hits heavy for me. So we have Don Quixote, obviously, by Cervantes. I'm not going to talk too much about that. We all know what it is. It's one of the first serious books of literature I've read, if you want to call it serious, even though it's kind of satirical, a take on the chivalric novels of the Renaissance, medieval ages. That time period around like the 1500s, 16th century. So Don Quixote starts us off, and it was also the first book in this tradition that I have read. After that, it actually went to Neruda, whose poetry I had read next. And again, I rated him third in poetry, but that's still solid. 3 of 3 is still pretty good on my rating scale, at least. You're in the top 3. But then after that, we get into, first of all, potentially my favorite author of all time, who's Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I've read all of his fiction. I've read all of his short stories and novels. And I've read a good bit of his nonfiction. I have everything that he's written. Even like, I have like a textbook that he wrote with Fidel Castro that I have not read yet. But I have everything that he's written, and just all of his fiction and short stories are just phenomenal. I feel like every single sentence he wrote, he had a purpose to it. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez could probably carry this category. Fernando Pessoa, The Book of Disquiet. I guess I could kind of throw him in poetry as well. So maybe that does shake up the poetry rankings. But The Book of Disquiet I read, I think at the end of last year. And just, I loved the time of day every day where I could dip into The Book of Disquiet and just see what was going on in Pessoa's personalities. Then we have Borges, Jorge Luis Borges. So I've read his collected fictions, which is all of his short story collections, and I do find myself rereading those short stories. I just love the mental games that he plays. It's just truly, it's one of those books that's just fun to read. Like that book, I think of A Confederacy of Dunces as just a fun read. And Borges is definitely up there. And then we have the most recent author on this list, at least for Spanish. I think the most recent author overall would be Elena Ferrante. But Roberto Bolaño, or Bolaño. I can't remember if it's an N-Y or not above the N. But, so I have read, what have I read by him? 2666, The Savage Detectives, and then By Night in Chile. And I honestly could not rank them for you as to which one I like the best, just because I like them all so much. But yeah, so we go, in last place, unfortunately, is Italian, then French, then German, then Russian, and then Spanish. And then for poetry, we have Spanish, then German, and then French. This video has already gone on kind of long, so I'm not going to drag it out with an outro. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, this was just for fun. It's not meant to be serious. So please don't get offended if I ranked your favorite thing last or anything like that. And I think the thing I took away most from doing this was how much there is out there that I still have not read. Even on my own shelves, there was a lot of works in translation that I was like, man, I would love to read this, include this in the video, but I just don't have time. I've been putting off this video for a while now. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and have a great day, everyone.